Let's be honest about something. Everybody wants to stay young. Maybe you bought the cream. Maybe you skipped the sugar, taken the supplements, Googled how to look younger at 2 in the morning. That's fine. That's human. But here's a question you probably never had to ask yourself. How far would you actually go? Because about 400 years ago, in a castle deep in the kingdom of Hungary, there lived a countess who, the story says, went further than anyone in history. They say she murdered hundreds of young women and bathed in their blood because she believed it would keep her young forever. Her name was Elizabeth Bathory. You might know her as the Blood Countess. And today, we're asking the two questions nobody stops to ask. 1. Would that even work? And 2. Did it actually happen? Here's the version you've probably heard. Elizabeth Bathory, a Hungarian noblewoman, tortured and killed as many as 650 girls. Guinness World Records still list her as the most prolific female serial killer of all time. And the detail everyone remembers, the reason was vanity. She was terrified of getting old, so she drained her victims and bathed in their blood like a real-life vampire. It's one of the darkest stories in European history. There's just one problem. That number, 650? It comes from a single witness who says she'd heard about a book that listed the victims. A book that nobody, then or since, has ever found. And the blood baths? The single most famous thing about this woman? In every document written while she was alive, every letter, every testimony, every court record, they appear exactly 0 times. So where did all of this come from? Let's open the file. Start with what we can actually verify. Elizabeth Bathory was real, born in 1560 into one of the most powerful families in Hungary, a family that produced judges, princes, even the King of Poland. She married as a teenager, ran enormous estates, read and wrote in multiple languages, which, for the time, made her more educated than most of the men around her. And when her husband died in 1604, she became one of the wealthiest widows in Central Europe. Remember that word, wealthiest. It matters later. Then, around 1610, the rumors started. Girls sent to work at her castle weren't coming home. The king ordered an investigation led by a man named Georgi Thurzo, the Palatine, basically the highest-ranking official in the kingdom. And Thurzo collected evidence, a lot of it. Over 300 witness statements. And let's be clear about something. Some of what's in those testimonies is genuinely disturbing. Beatings, needles, girls left out in the winter cold, bodies buried in secret. We're not going to linger on the details, but if even a fraction of it is true, terrible things happened in that castle. Then, on December 29th, 1610, Thurzo raided the castle. He would later write that his men caught the countess, quote, in the act. Her servants were arrested, and within days, 3 of them were tried, convicted, and executed. Case closed, right? Except here's the first glitch. Elizabeth herself was never put on trial. Not that week, not ever. No trial, no conviction, no sentence. Instead, she was confined inside her own castle. Some accounts say literally walled into her rooms, with slots for food, where she stayed until she died 4 years later. Now think about that. The most notorious murderer in Europe, and she never saw a courtroom. Why? Follow the money. The royal crown owed the Bathory family a fortune. The king had borrowed heavily from her husband to fund his wars. If Elizabeth was convicted, her lands could be seized and the debt would conveniently evaporate. But a public trial was risky. She was educated, connected, and powerful enough to fight back. A quiet imprisonment, no verdict, no appeal, that solved everyone's problem. To be fair, none of this proves she was innocent. Real testimonies describe real victims, and many historians believe real crimes happened. But it does mean this: every single person who wrote the official story has something to gain from how it ended. And through all of it, 300 testimonies, the raid, the letters, the executions, One thing is completely missing. Nobody mentions blood bath. So where does the most famous blood bath in history actually come from? To find it, you have to live 1611 and travel more than a century into the future. The year is 1729. Elizabeth has been dead for 115 years, and a Jesuit scholar named Laszlo Turoczi publishes a book about the case, and in it, he includes the local legends told in the villages around her castle. And there it is, for the first time anywhere in writing. The Countess bathed in the blood of virgins to preserve her beauty. 115 years after her death. Think about what that gap means. That's like a book coming out today, revealing a shocking new fact about someone who died in 1910, based on village gossip, with no earlier source. Whatever that is, it isn't evidence, it's folklore, with a timestamp. And here's the thing about the timestamp. It runs the wrong way. Real evidence gets recorded close to the event and fades with distance. Legends do the opposite. They grow with distance, and this one grew beautifully. Each retelling added a detail. First, she washed in blood. Then she bathed in it. Then the bath needed refilling, which meant a supply, which meant a system. The 19th century wrapped her in vampire mythology. She and Dracula started appearing in the same sentences, and some writers even argue she helped inspire the novel. Though, for the record, Bram Stoker's own notes never mentioned her. By the 20th century, it didn't matter. Movies, novels, video games, metal albums, she's always in the bath. The one scene that almost certainly never happened is the only scene anyone remembers. But let's take the legend seriously for a second, because hiding inside it is a question that's weirdly fun to answer. Say she had done it. Would it work? Does bathing in blood do anything at all, for your skin? Short answer, no. Longer answer, it's actually worse than doing nothing. Here's why. Your skin is a barrier. That's its whole job. It doesn't absorb collagen or proteins or youth from anything you soak in. That's simply not how skin works. Whatever was in that bath would stay on her, not in her. And it gets worse. Blood outside the body starts clotting within minutes. A bathtub of it wouldn't even stay liquid. It will be cold and congealing, and we'll leave it there. If anything, the iron in it would oxidize and temporarily stain her skin. So the miracle beauty treatment of the legend is, dermatologically speaking, a scam, even by 16th century standards. But here's the twist. The instinct behind the legend never died. Right now, today, people are paying hundreds of dollars in clinics for something called a vampire facial. Your own blood drawn from your arm, spun down to plasma, and needled back into your face. The science on whether it works is politely mixed. But the belief underneath it, that blood carries youth, and youth can be bought, that is the exact belief this legend put in a castle 400 years ago. We didn't outgrow the story, we just changed the packaging. Which brings us to the real question, the one this whole file has been circling. If the blood bath never happened, why has the story survived for 300 years? Think about who she was. A rich, powerful, educated widow. No husband, no male guardian. In a world that had exactly one category for a woman like that. Dangerous. Her story kept getting retold, not because it was true, but because it was useful. It punished vanity. It punished power in a woman's hands. It took a messy, political, unresolved case and turned it into a clean morality tale, with a monster, a bathtub, and a lesson. And useful stories outlive true ones, every time. So, what's the verdict? Was Elizabeth Bathory a serial killer? Honestly, she may have been. Many historians read those 300 testimonies and see real crimes. Others see a conspiracy built to erase a debt. 400 years later, that part of the file is still open. But the thing she's famous for, the blood, the bath, the vampire countess, that was written by other people. long after she was dead, long after she could answer. And here's the part that should stick with you. You knew this story. Before today, you'd probably heard of the Blood Countess, which means that somewhere along the line, a piece of village folklore from 1729 made it into your head, file under history. So, what else is in there? How many other facts you've never questioned were written a century later by someone with a story to sell? That's what this channel is for. History has glitches. We find them. Next file. A king's tomb. A string of mysterious deaths and a curse that made headlines around the world, until the file shows something much stranger actually killed them. Subscribe. We'll open it together.